The town of Red Hollow had a way of remembering sins longer than it remembered kindness, and Elowyn Hart arrived there, carrying both on her back like an invisible sack of stones. She came on a dust-choked afternoon, riding the back bench of a mail wagon, her boots worn thin, her wedding ring long gone, her name already stained by whispers she had never spoken aloud herself. Divorce was not just a broken promise in the West. It was a brand burned into a woman's life, and Red Hollow read that brand clearly in the way eyes slid past. Her face and doors closed a breath too early. Elowyn had once been the wife of a shopkeeper in a river town east of the plains. But when the marriage collapsed under cruelty disguised as respectability, she was the one who had been pushed out, stripped of shelter and reputation alike. By the time she stepped down from the wagon, she had learned how to stand straight while the world leaned away from her, how to keep her voice steady even when dignity felt like a memory borrowed from someone else's life. She found work where forgotten people always did, scrubbing floors at the boarding house, mending clothes for men who never learned her name, sleeping in a narrow attic room that smelled of old wood and loneliness. Every Sunday she sat alone at the back of the church, aware of the silence that followed her like a shadow. In Red Hollow, forgiveness was preached loudly and practiced quietly, if at all. What Elowyn did not know was that her life, so carefully shrinking to fit the space allowed her, had already crossed paths with another soul living at the edges of belonging. His name was Calder Boone, a rancher who lived miles beyond town, where the land rolled open and judgment carried less weight. Calder was known as a man of few words, broad-shouldered, steady, his presence like the land itself, unadorned, enduring, and slow to trust. He came into town only when supplies demanded it, and when he did, people noticed him not because he spoke, but because he listened. Calder first saw Elowyn, without knowing her name, watching her struggle to lift a crate outside the mercantile, her hands red from work, her posture proud despite exhaustion. Something in the way she refused. Help until it was unavoidable stirred a recognition he couldn't name. He had buried a wife once, lost to illness, not scandal, and since then, solitude had become his chosen companion. Yet as weeks passed, his eyes found Elowyn more often than the shelves he came to stock. He noticed how the town failed her in small, practiced ways, and how she endured it without bitterness, only a quiet resolve that made his chest tighten for reasons he did not yet understand. When winter pressed early that year, Red Hollow grew harsher and work grew scarcer. The boarding house dismissed Elowyn without ceremony, citing slow business, though both of them knew the truth lay deeper than coin. With nowhere to go and pride refusing to beg, she packed her few belongings and prepared to leave town on foot. Uncertain where the road might carry her, it was Calder who stopped his horse beside her at the edge of town, his voice low, careful, offering not charity but choice. He told her he needed help at his ranch, someone to cook, tend the house, keep company with the quiet. He made it clear she would be paid, respected, free to leave whenever she wished. Elowyn studied him for a long moment, weighing risk against desperation, and finally nodded, not out of hope, but out of survival. The Boone Ranch lay beneath a vast sky that seemed to breathe easier than Red Hollow ever had. There were no curious eyes there, no whispered judgments, only work that mattered and silence that healed. Calder gave Elowyn her own room, her own space, and something she had not felt in a long time, safety without expectation. Days passed in steady rhythm, and though neither spoke of their pasts, something gentle grew between them, rooted not in romance, but in respect. For the first time since her marriage ended, Elowyn slept without fear, and for the first time since his wife's death, Calder felt the house breathe again. Spring came slowly, and with it change neither of them dared name aloud. Elowyn learned the land, learned Calder's silences, learned how grief could live quietly beside gratitude. Calder learned how laughter sounded again inside his walls, how meals shared without words could still feel like communion. The town noticed her absence, but spoke of it only as a rumor, uncertain whether to pity or condemn. What they did not see was the way Elowyn stood taller now, her voice steadier, her eyes no longer searching for permission to exist. On the ranch, she was not a divorced woman, not a cautionary tale, she was simply Elowen. Trouble, however, has a way of following those who dare to rebuild. When Elowen's former husband, Merrick Hale, arrived in Red Hollow chasing debts and wounded pride, he learned quickly where she had gone. He rode out to the Boone Ranch one evening, his words sharp with entitlement, demanding what he believed was still his. Calder stood between them without raising his voice, his presence enough to halt the cruelty Merrick carried like a weapon. Elowen spoke for herself that day, her voice unshaken as she refused to return to a life that had nearly erased her. The law, thin as it was, sided with her freedom, and Merrick rode away defeated, leaving behind the last shadow of her former life. After that, something shifted irrevocably. Calder and Elowen did not speak of love, but it lived in the spaces between their actions, in the way he waited for her opinion, in the way she trusted his silence. The ranch became a place not just of refuge, but of belonging. When Calder finally asked her to stay, not as hired help, but as partner, he did so without kneeling, without grand promises, only honesty. Elowen said yes, not because she needed saving, but because she had already saved herself, and now chose him freely. They married quietly, beneath the open sky. No church bells, no audience, only vows spoken plainly and kept fiercely. Red Hollow heard of it months later, surprised, to learn the forgotten woman had not vanished but risen. Elowen returned to town once, not to prove anything, but to collect supplies, her hand resting easily in Calder's, her presence calm, unbreakable. Those who once judged her found no power left in their words. The Boone Ranch flourished, not because love erased hardship, but because it gave it meaning. Elowen became known as a woman of strength and fairness, Calder as a man who chose integrity over approval. Together, they built a life that answered no accusations and needed no forgiveness from a world that had failed them both. And so the story ends not with rescue, but with choice, with a divorced woman who refused to disappear, and a cowboy who did not save her, but gave her what the world would not, a home where she was never forgotten again.